Democrats are revamping their efforts to win over Latino voters in 2020.
One place in particular that they are focusing is Nevada, where Latinos have been credited with helping move the state from Republican control to blue in less than a decade. Here to discuss these efforts is Hill reporter Rafael Bernal. He's got a new report out. Great to see you, Rafael.
Thanks for having me.
Just first talk about the importance of Nevada, where it is in the early state lineup, and the significance for sort of the trajectory for the rest of the race.
Well, it's the third state where Democrats will vote to elect their presidential nominee. It's the first state where minority plays a significant role.
Right.
Like before South Carolina, where African Americans, it's sort of where the African American vote gets tested. Nevada's the testing ground for how campaigns are doing with the Latino vote. Mm-hmm. And the Latino vote is huge in Nevada for a multitude of reasons. Demographic change in the state over the last 20 years, the fact that a lot of the state's economy depends on tourism,
right.
And tourism workers tend to be disproportionately Hispanic. And they're disproportionately unionized, which really helps the Democrats. Right. They've been organizing like this forever. But 20 years ago, 15 years ago, even before the 2010 cycle, Nevada was pretty much a red state. And Democrats were not going after Latinos. Harry Reid in that 2010 cycle realized that he needed that Latino vote. He needed to sort of do what they had done.
Who was that woman he was running against? I forgot her name.
I forget as well.
Wait, was that?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
But it was close.
Yeah.
It was close, and it was Harry Reid.
I mean, it's a true 50-50 state, I think Nevada is, right? But now, or it was. Now it's maybe more like a 49. I don't know. It's like 49-51. It really could swing either way.
So 2016, it was a silver lining for Democrats because they really turned it blue. They got control of the state legislature, both houses. They got control of the 3 of 4 House districts.
Yeah.
And they kept that Senate seat, Catherine Cortez Masto, and they elected a Latina to the Senate, crucially. And
which was his basically handpicked candidate as well. So, I mean, everything in Nevada, Harry Reid hangs over everything that happens in Nevada.
Harry Reid, Dinah Titus has a lot to do. There's a lot of power players, but they all understand after 2010, the Latino vote is crucial to keeping that state.
And so to that point, I mean, we have our latest Suffolk University Reno Gazette Journal poll. This is from January 8th to 11th, 4.4% margin of error. Let's throw it up on the screen. We have Bernie Sanders actually sitting 21%, Joe Biden at 18%. Broadly, with that's just Hispanic voters. Broadly, amongst all voters, Biden is actually at 19%, but Bernie's right behind him at 18%. I mean, that just shows you what we're talking about Latino vote. Bernie seems to have the upper hand here, and according to some polling I've got in front of me, healthcare is the #1 issue for Latino voters in Nevada, Rafael. So this really is, it's basically a snapshot of the national election.
Pretty much across the board, Latino voters, healthcare is always a top issue.
Yeah.
Whether they're unionized and they're getting, subpar healthcare, or they're paying really high costs despite having insurance, whether they're contractors and they have to pay for their own healthcare.
Right.
The Latinos sort of are in all the spots where American healthcare has vacuums.
Yeah.
And so it becomes that important issue. Of course, education costs are also big, especially in states where the Latino population is a lot younger, for obvious reasons.
Totally.
Bernie has a very interesting ground game in Nevada, and he's replicating it in California. The other guy who's doing it in California, sort of like Bernie, is Michael Bloomberg. So that's going to be interesting. That's something to
talk to us about that. What does that look like? What do both of their operations have in common?
So their operations, the Nevada one is based out of the Bernie Nevada one is based out of the caucus education that they're doing in Iowa. But they're also doing it early, so it's sort of early and often contact with low propensity Latino voters.
Yeah.
Reach out to young people who either just turned 18 or are 21 or 22 and didn't vote in the last election, but who are eligible. And they're right there. They're just sitting there. And it's a lot of assumptions and research that Latino groups have done over time to say, like, how do you get Latinos to vote? Because it was always this myth of the sleeping giant that I can tell you, saying that angers Latinos with good reason.
Yeah.
Because it's not really a sleeping giant. It's just a voting bloc that hasn't been reached out to by campaigns.
Right. It's like, you haven't asked me to vote. You haven't given me a reason to vote, right?
Right.
It's always put on the voter, like it's your fault, right? We had Chuck Rocha on the show. Was that just yesterday?
Yes.
Feels like a long time.
I don't know what that was.
Anyway,
is
it's been a long week. I feel like one of the things that has been exciting to me is we've had a window into this because of having Chuck on this show early on and him laying out the ground game, and that this was an integral part of the Sanders team and their plan for how they would win the election. I mean, how much of what he's saying is spin in terms of how early they were on the ground and how much they were reaching out to voters versus other campaigns, and how much of it is reality?
So, I mean, there's always a little spin there. They're always trying to make themselves look better.
Sure, of
There
course.
are other campaigns that have been there early. What Chuck is bringing to the table, and that's not to take away from like Cristobal Alex in Biden's camp, but Chuck is at a higher level in his campaign, so he
has more influence.
He can steer the boat more.
Right.
He's holding.
So then let's talk about Biden at first. What's going on with Joe Biden in these states? He's sitting pretty. I mean, well, really, he's tied with Bernie Sanders. I mean, this is a true toss-up between the two.
I mean, he does have a ground game. There's no doubt that Biden has the biggest national ground game. The difference is it's not just reaching out early. It's reaching out in I don't mean Spanish language, but in the language that these voters would understand. And sometimes it does imply that it's in Spanish.
Right.
But it's sort of talking to them the way. I always sort of slip back to Bill Clinton talking to soccer moms. He talked to them in a way that they would understand.
Yeah.
Well, that's true of any voting bloc.
Right.
Sure.
And Chuck has these piles and piles and piles of research, and Cristobal has these piles and piles and piles of research, and all the Latino advisors have these piles of research that were used in 2018 successfully. You saw, I mean, places in Texas where you have like 92% Latino population, almost tripling their turnout compared to 2014. What do? They reached out early and often. They reached out, I mean, in a word, they campaigned to these people.
Right, they actually
That's all it
tried.
is.
They actually
And so
tried.
what do you think, if, whoever does well in Nevada, whoever does best with Latino voters in Nevada, what does that mean for the remainder of the campaign and how things might play out?
Well, if we get a surprise in Nevada, say, the Sanders ground game really turns out, we're looking at California and Texas on Super Tuesday, just, 2 weeks later?
Yes.
And there's a giant treasure chest of Latino voters. And if it turns out that these techniques are working, it's too late for other campaigns to catch up because they've been doing this for 8 months. And if it works and suddenly we get a surprise in Nevada, we should prepare for a surprise in California and Texas. Certain issues make it different because it's harder to vote for independent voters in California. It's harder to vote in general for minority voters in Texas. So it might not be like a one-to-one. If you won them all in Nevada, you'll win them all in Texas.
Right.
But you will get better results. And
It's sort of a test run.
it's a test run, and that means a ton of delegates.
Yeah.
It certainly does. Well,
Interesting.
very interesting.
Thank you, Raphael.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Next on Rising, Obama world may not like Senator Bernie Sanders, but it appears Trump world may have some concerns too. The Daily Beast reporter Hannah Trudeau, she's going to explain all that next.